This is 91.3 FM, WCUW in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Dr. Chris Radio Horror program, and we have a recorded interview with Barbie Wilde, the female Cenobite from Hellraiser 2 Hellbound, on the show with us now, and we did this recorded interview, question kind of Q&A with Barbie, and she was kind enough to answer some questions for us about Hellraiser. What have you been up to since 2000? Your IMDb lists no projects since then, so we've been really curious about what you've been doing.
Well, acting left me behind, as the thespian said. I went into TV presenting and then some casting, but for the most part I've been working on my writing projects. My first novel, The Venus Complex, was published by Comet Press in late 2012 to some pretty wonderful reviews. I wanted to explore the sexual mindscape and fantasies of male serial killers, so I wrote from the first person in the form of a diary. My research had to be pretty exhaustive, as you can imagine, so that's why the book took so long to write. I've also written a lot of short stories. My first short story came out in 2009, and it was called Sister Celise, and that was for the Hellbound Hearts anthology. U for Uranophobia for the Phobophobia anthology. American Mutant, Hands of Dominion for the Mutation Nation anthology. Polyp for the Mammoth Book of Body Horror, and that was reprinted in the Unspoken anthology. A is for Alpdruck for the Demonological Biblica anthology. Z is for Zulu Zombies for the Bestiar and Vocabulum anthology, which also was reprinted in Gore Zone 29. And then the Cilician Pandoric, which is a sequel to Sister Celise, for Gore Zone 30. And finally, Botophobia, which is a fear of basements, not bottoms. That's coming out in the Phobophobias anthology, which should be out later this summer.
Do you hit a lot of conventions?
Yeah, this year is going to be great for conventions. Monsterpalooza in LA was in March, and then Texas Frightmare Weekend in Dallas in May, Bazaar Atlantic City in June, Flash Forward in Chicago, and the Festival of Fear in Toronto in August. I always love going to conventions and meeting the fans and hooking up with my fellow Cenobites and anybody else who was in Hellraiser, Hellbound as well. It's fabulous.
Talk about what you're so well known for, the female Cenobite, is, and how the costume and makeup, and how long did it take to put on? Give us a little bit of a background behind it.
Well, the makeup process was pretty grueling and uncomfortable, to be honest, but I actually got off easy, as my prosthetic makeup only took 4 hours to apply. Doug's was 5, and Ken Cranham's Channard Cenobite took 6 hours. My costume took about half an hour to put on. But it was worth it in the end. The first time I saw myself in the mirror made up as the female Cenobite was pretty amazing, and I do think that in many ways the costume and makeup design informed our performances and, gave us the feelings of power and demonic stuff. It's really excellent.
How was working with Clive Barker?
Well, actually, Clive was prepping for Nightbreed at the time of the Hellbound shoot, so I didn't see that much of him. I only got to know him after the filming was over. I mean, he was the executive producer on the film, so he probably did come to the set a lot, but we spent most of our time just waiting around the dressing room for our appearances. That is very common on film shoots and stuff, film sets, because if you're not required, you're in the way. So we spent most of our time in the dressing room waiting for to be called to the set. So I think that, like I said, Clive was going to be directing Nightbreed, so he was very much involved in that project at the same time as Hellbound was being shot.
How was Doug Bradley on set?
Doug was brilliant. He's very funny and very patient with the makeup process. At least he was more patient than I was. He's a really great storyteller, which kept our spirits up during the filming. Everybody I worked with on Hellbound was fabulous, and it's great meeting up with them at convention all these years later, as I said. If you look on YouTube and put in image animation and behind the scenes of Hellraiser 2, there is some footage of us in the makeup room larking about and keeping our spirits up as we wait to go on set. And, Butterball, Simon Banford's doing a can without his head or his mask head. And Doug's larking about in his leotard. And I'm singing Bye Bye My Lieber Herr to Little John in full Cenobite makeup. I'm in full Cenobite makeup, not Little John. But it's great seeing what goes on behind the scenes if you want to have a look on YouTube.
How have you ever read The Hellbound Heart?
Absolutely. I first read it as background for my character in the film, and then I read the story again before I wrote Sister Celeste, because all the stories in the Hellbound Hearts anthology had to be based on Clive's novella rather than the Hellraiser films for legal reasons. I love that book. It's so beautifully written, so sexy, and surprisingly funny as well. I took my inspiration for Sister Celeste from the fact that the lead Cenobite in the Hellbound Heart was female, which I thought was quite wonderful.
Have you ever been exposed to the BDSM world before the movie?
Not really. And to be honest, it wasn't something that I was thinking a lot about during the making of the movie, as surprising as that may sound. Subsequently, however, I have met a lot of people in that world, and it was a very famous dominatrix who once confessed to me that her greatest sexual fantasy was to sleep with a serial killer. That started off the train of thought that became my novel, The Venus Complex, because I just thought, wow, that's really out there. But at the same time, that's really interesting. And which is why I wanted to explore the sort of sexual motivations of serial killers. So it's all sort of tied up in different ways somehow over the years.
Do you meet a lot of fans who recognize you?
Well, the friends that come to horror conventions obviously know who I am, but do I get recognized in the street? No. I'd have to be bald and have strange piercings in my cheeks and nose and a big open wound in my throat to have that happen.
Do you like horror movies and science fiction movies?
Well, I love sci-fi films. My dad was a big fan of both sci-fi movies and fiction, so I love that genre. I'm a bit pickier about horror. I love seeing real innovation in horror movies, and a lot of movies today seem to be either rehashing the classics or just torture porn. However, American Mary by the Soska sisters and Sinister were both excellent examples of films that can be unusual and break new ground in the genre, in my humble opinion, that is.
How cool was it to work with Charles Bronson? Out of all the famous people that you've worked with, I see that to be probably one of your biggest, and I think that's a really cool thing that you got to work with such an iconic actor. I've heard some really interesting stories about him, so I think I definitely hope that was a great experience.
Extremely cool. He was a real gent. Death Wish 3 was a great movie to work on, and the director, Michael Winner, was a real character. And also, I give really good scream in that movie when Gavin O'Herlihy is Gatling gunned out the window by Chuck at the very end. I put my all into that scream. So that was great fun to work on.
What's your favorite movie of all time?
Oh, goodness, I couldn't possibly just pick one. I love Blade Runner. One of my favorite sci-fi films is Minority Report, and I also have to say, the thing from Another World, the 50s version, was, and again, another wonderful sci-fi film, and of course Carpenter's Thing was brilliant as well. My favorite horror film has to be the first, Hellraiser, doesn't it? I love that film. My favorite serial killer film is Hitchcock's Psycho, closely followed by American Psycho. And I basically love films by Quentin Tarantino, Hitchcock, Coen Brothers, David Cronenberg, and anything that's film noir.
Do you have any hobbies or things that you collect, kind of like stuff that you do in your free time when you're not making movies or going to conventions?
I suppose photography is one of my favorites. As far as collecting things is concerned, I love technology, and like any woman, I love jewelry. I'm into skull motifs at the moment, so anything with a skull on it is fair game, rather. And also, I do love lament configuration boxes. I think they're so beautiful and amazing, and I've been lucky enough to be given some quite extraordinary ones recently. A lot of people ask me this, but they said, did you get to take anything away from the set? And I did walk up to the prop guy at the end and say, listen, I don't suppose I could have one of those boxes, could I? And he just looked at me and laughed. I mean, he didn't even say no, he just laughed. So I never got anything from the set. But there's some really interesting people out there who are creating some beautiful puzzle boxes. So that's another one of my collectibles.
Do you have any plans for the future coming up?
Well, I'm writing a movie screenplay based on my short story, Zulu Zombies. There's a sequel to The Venus Complex on the cards. I'm appearing, I have appeared, and it's going to be hopefully coming out this year, in a new documentary called Leviathan, The Making of Hellraiser and Hellbound, which is going to be an extraordinarily comprehensive look at the first two Hellraiser films. I want to release a collection of my short stories. I'm also returning to acting after a very long time with a film called Bad Medicine. It's a horror movie written by Amazon #1 horror author Dave Jeffrey and helmed by Bram Stoker award-winning director James Hart. It was such an inventive and innovative script that I just couldn't resist. I'll be playing the part of an unconventional therapist called Dr. Slade. It's what's called a portmanteau or anthology film. All these 5 different stories with a wraparound story of these patients in an asylum, and I'm the therapist. Ha ha ha. So I'm really looking forward to that. If you want to keep up with what I'm up to, just follow me on Facebook. I think there's a couple other Barbie Wildes, but there can be only one Barbie Wilde on Facebook. And I have an author-actress page on there as well. My website is called www.barbiewilde.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at Barbie Wilde.
Well, thanks so much for doing the interview, Barbie. It's been great. It was great communicating with you on Twitter as well.
Thanks, Dave. It's been such a pleasure being on the Radio of Horror. Thanks for interviewing me.